Thank you. All right, now I am super excited to introduce you to our first keynote speaker of the day, Sister Simone Campbell. She is a Catholic nun and member of the Sisters of Social Service. She is also
That was me.
She is also not tech savvy. Sorry. She is a lawyer, a lobbyist, a poet, and a Zen contemplative. Since 2004, Sister Simone has served as the executive director of Network, a Washington, D.C.-based Catholic social justice lobby dedicated to affecting policy on Capitol Hill. She lobbies on issues of peace building, immigration reform, healthcare, and economic justice in the hopes of making policy based on the real-life needs of the 100%. She's perhaps most famous as the face of Nuns on the Bus, a group of Catholic sisters who toured the U.S. by bus beginning in 2012, stopping at homeless shelters, schools, parks, and healthcare facilities to protest the proposed federal cuts in programs for the poor and working families. A subsequent bus tour brought attention to the influence of outside money in our political system and the need for everyday Americans to get out and vote. She has appeared on 60 Minutes, The Colbert Report, The Daily Show. And she has received zillions of awards, including a Franklin D. Roosevelt Four Freedoms Award and the Defender of Democracy Award from the International Parliamentarians for Global Action. Please join me in welcoming Sister Simone Campbell.
Now we'll see if I can be technologically oriented here. Get myself organized. Uh-oh. Help. It's a little too intense, isn't it? Thank you. All right. Oh, that's so much better, I hope. I hate standing behind these things. What a great honor to be able to be here with folks who work in a variety of ways to try to heal our planet. And what I hope to be able to do today is talk about some of the intersections, some of the challenges that we're facing, and then how do we move forward together. We just completed our fourth bus trip. I keep thinking, they're going to be over. I mean, getting on a bus, driving around, but there continues to be need. And what I realized in this bus trip that we just did is that I think about the trips as strategy for what's happening in Washington, D.C., trying to make some sense out of that. And if you've been listening to the news the last 24 hours, you can understand why it's a little difficult to make sense out of much of anything there right now. But I have to say that Pope Francis's visit, I began to think, maybe part of the problem is that I'm so cynical. And that he said to Congress, I believe you can do this. And it was the first person in a long time who had said that to them. So his level of faith was quite surprising, but I guess that's what a pope's for, is for faith. But what I want to talk about is this intersection of challenges that we're facing. In the recent encyclical that you probably have heard about, how many of you have read Laudato Si? Yeah. This is a miracle of a Roman document, because most documents out of Rome, out of our beloved church, have a tendency to be cures for insomnia. This one, on the other hand, is a compelling read. And at our small shop at Network, we divvied up the different chapters. We're going to have a rapid response thing. And so I had the first chapter to read, and then we're going to read the conclusion. Everybody was reading the conclusion. But when we got together the day after it came out, we discovered everybody had stayed up late reading the whole thing, just because it was so compelling. But in paragraph 217, Pope Francis says, the external deserts in the world are growing because the internal deserts have become so vast. For this reason, the ecological crisis is also a summons to profound interior conversion. It must be said that some committed and prayerful Christians, with the excuse of realism and pragmatism, tend to ridicule expressions of concern for the environment. Have we seen that? Others are passive. They choose not to change their habits and thus become inconsistent. So what they all need is an ecological conversion, whereby the effects of their encounter with the divine become evident in their relationship with the world around them. Living our vocation to be protectors of God's handiwork is essential to a life of virtue. It is not an optional or secondary aspect of our faith experience. It's at the heart of who we are. And so I want to talk about some of the challenges that we're facing that we met on our recent bus trip, and how that then can lead us to a deeper conversion and maybe a greater sense of openness and engagement, and hopefully nourish our roots to keep at it, because Lord knows we've got some work to do. You may have noticed. On the bus trip, we started, this bus trip that we just did was in advance of Pope Francis's visit. And the whole idea was Pope Francis keeps speaking about an engaged politics, a politics that manages the economy, that one of the challenges with the huge income and wealth disparity in our world is because we're so out of balance when it comes to a politics that can regulate the market effectively and a market that responds to the common good, to the needs of people. What a radical thought. The needs of people as opposed to my own private collection of more riches. So Pope Francis says that what we've got to do is to have a politics that is strong enough to manage the economy in order to create an economy of inclusion. Well, the way we started to talk about it is that in order to have an economy of inclusion, we need a politics of inclusion first. And what we see happening in the House of Representatives right now with the fight over the speaker, have y'all seen that thing? You know, the speaker Kevin McCarthy from California, where I'm from, backed out. Now, I want to know the rest of the story. What's the gossip about that? Because he was hot to be speaker, so I think some of the shenanigans that have been going on probably will come back to bite him. But it's a mess. It's a huge mess. And so as long as politics is a mess, the economy continues on its own. And here's the challenge in the economy, is that we in the Christian tradition refer to original sin. I mean, we get tempted to greed. We get tempted to, people are getting annoyed. Are people getting annoyed by this feedback? I am. Well, try to take care of it. I'll use the podium. If that's supposed to be that help. Just help me out of your pocket. Take it out of my pocket over there. Just hold it. See how big it's this? No, it's not on at all. Well, it's all right. All right, this one's still on. I'll use this one. It's good discipline for me. Okay, so the challenge is to have a economy that isn't just about profit for the few, but is about the common good, the shared reality, that where everyone benefits. Now, on this bus trip then, we started in St. Louis where there was, well, because it's sort of an iconic place for some of the divides in our country. You know, Ferguson, the unrest in August of 2014 took place just outside of St. Louis. There continues to be huge racial tensions. Not only that, but there is a large Superfund cleanup site where since World War II, they've been arguing over who should clean it up. Now, I don't want to say anything, but that's longer than even I've been alive. And you would think they could figure it out. And what this Superfund cleanup site is, the radioactive tailings from the construction of the first atomic bomb that we used in Japan. And so what happened after World War II is they just sort of covered it all up. So a Geiger counter looked good. Well, now what's happened is that that's caught fire. An underground fire that is now working its way towards the Missouri River. And because of political paralysis, they continue to have a fight over, well, who's responsible for cleaning it up. You would think they would be a little concerned. But then what we realized was that this Superfund cleanup site is surrounded by low-income neighborhoods. It's folks without clout. Folks without clout can't get their voice heard about what's happening to our earth. And so these two issues go together, of the economy and the care for our earth. Also in St. Louis, we got to meet with this group called Mothers to Mothers. They were formed by Reverend Tracy Blackman, this fabulous pastor, after the unrest in Ferguson. And these moms came together, African-American moms came together, and they said, what can we do? What can we do to address this toxicity of racism? And what they came up with as African-American moms, they decided to go talk to groups of white moms about what African-American moms have to worry about with their sons, that white moms don't have to worry about, to try to address the toxicity of racism. Because while I know I walk around in a white skin that has privilege, I really didn't understand the consequences of that in quite the same way as when I heard these moms talk. Marlo, I'll never forget, she's a tall, really attractive, fabulous, gray-haired, vibrant, she's a person who has her doctorate in early childhood education. She's worked with young kids. You could just see her passion for her family and for her ministry. And Marlo said she's worried about her grandson. She's terrified for her grandson, Chico. Because he was named Chico because he was always a small little kid, just a little term of endearment. And he was one of those kids that you just want to, ruffle his hair and pat him on the head. Well, Chico's now 14 and a half, and he had a growth spurt starting at 13 and a half. He's now over 6 feet tall. But he still feels like the little Chico inside. And she's terrified that just because Chico has become so big, he could frighten some people. He could be seen as confrontational because he walks as a young man in dark skin. Her fear is quite well placed. Amy, who teaches at one of the universities, told us that she has an 8th grader and a 10th grader, boys, and she quizzes them regularly so they are prepared. She said she's trying to teach them humility so that they don't get any teenage attitude, is what she called it. And you can imagine how hard that is for a teenager not to get teenage attitude, but I think it's almost impossible. But she keeps trying, and so she quizzes them about what they will do when they're stopped by the police. It's not if, it's when. And what she says is that she quizzes them on keeping their hands out of their pockets, keep their arms away from their body, say yes sir, no sir, and don't have any teenage attitude. And a couple of weeks, or a week before we met with them, she said, her 8th grader said to her, "Mommy, how long is this going to go on?" And Amy had to say to him, "For the rest of your life." Now, it's the toxicity that's happening to our earth and our toxicity of racism that's happening in our society that we need to heal. We need to find a way where our hearts are broken open and we can make a difference. We can make
change. We can heal both our earth and our society. Because to heal our earth, we need to all work together. So you think, good grief, how is this ever going to happen? We've been working on the issue of race for an inordinately long period of time, and I don't know if we've made much progress at all. Well, here's what Pope Francis says in the encyclical about the way forward. He says that his goal in this encyclical is not to amass information or to satisfy curiosity, but rather to become painfully aware, to dare to turn what is happening to the world into our own personal suffering, and thus to discover what each of us can do about it. Now, what can we do? Well, clearly you're gathered here. We have a lot of resources about specifics on some energy efficiency and making a difference for energy consumption and trying to be responsible with the resources we have. But wow, this is fabulous and an important step forward, and I want to affirm the sponsors. Thank you very much. What I want to say is that it's bigger than that. It's bigger than that. This is an important first step, but we've got a lot more to do. In the encyclical, Pope Francis is going on about caring for the earth, and then you can just tell he got frustrated at one point, so he writes in, we use a crazy amount of air conditioning. He just had it. I think they must be keeping his apartment too cool or something, I don't know. But it was clear he was really frustrated. So that it becomes a whole different mindset of how we work together. So how do we take this in and let our hearts be broken open so that we can know that together we can make change, but it requires all of us to be converted? I think it requires us seeing beyond just my pet campaign to see that we all need to change in some fashion. Now, I must confess, and as a Catholic sister, we have confession on a regular basis, so I will confess to you, how's that I like to think that my way is just fine, and if only you would do it my way, we'd all be great. Have you ever discovered, do you have that same sense? Yes, bravo. I often invite God to step aside for a day and I'll just take over and it'll be fine. I especially know that with some politicians I like praying about. But what I think the challenge is to know that we're all called to change together. And what this requires is stepping closer to each other, not further away. And it's that challenge of stepping closer in our very rich nation that is almost impossible to accomplish. And from my perspective, until we get a greater sense of our communal connection, until we recover that, we are going to be at a loss to really make the significant environmental changes, the changes with regards to race and color, the changes with regards to just about every other issue we face. The change in the founding myth of our country from being communal to being individual started in 1980 with President Reagan's run for the White House. Now, he was a Californian, well, he was from California, he wasn't born there, I like to say, but I'm a Californian and I'm really sorry we exported him. But because what happened was, in his view, it became, and many of us in this room may be old enough to remember his ads. He had that one horse, the cowboy riding off into the sunset, and it was how the West was won by the individual guy. Now, those of us that are women could get annoyed at that, but the challenge he set for us was this individualistic identification for how we built our nation. And so we got away from the truth. Now, did you ever think about one wagon heading west? And if you called out, circled the wagons for protection, one little wagon going around in a circle wasn't going to do too well. Or you have a barn raising in the West and only one person shows up. That's not gonna work. Or you have a quilting bee. I tried this once. I tried to quilt a quilt by hand, by myself. That was the most ridiculous idea I've ever had. I discovered quickly after 5 years why you would have a quilting bee, which I finally had so we could finally finish the blessed thing. It's because it takes community. It takes community to build our society. It takes community to create warmth. It takes community to create safety. It takes community to be our best selves. It takes community to care for our earth, and it takes community to have meaning. The biggest challenge I believe we're facing in this effort to address environment and the toxicity of racism is the fact that we're individualistic. And we don't see that we need each other to make a difference. And if our hearts are broken open by the current state of our world, then what I have discovered is I have a whole new sense of urgency where I want to invite everyone in to be a part of making us better. And it's not about doing it my way. I've had to let go of that, even though I think I have some really good ideas. But it's about together finding out how can we make our society what we're called to be. The challenge is to need each other enough that we risk our separation, our sense of entitlement, to know that it's we the people. Now, for me as a person of faith, I'm grounded in the idea of community. I love the Christian scriptures are great because Jesus really set the example. You know, he never sent the apostles off one by one. Did you ever notice that? The poor doofuses, they probably would have gotten lost. And Peter couldn't find fish, and that was his job. So I think that the challenge is for those doing this work is that we do it together. We don't go one by one. We're together can make the difference. So what Pope Francis is challenging us to do is to move away from a culture of individualism, a culture that says, oh, you're just here to serve my needs periodically whenever I need them. Or that all of the resources we have, oh, we can just throw those things away, we don't need them anymore. The throwaway culture, a culture of exploitation, a culture of individualism divides. And where we're challenged is to come together, to say, I need you. I need you to be a part of this project. I need you to work with me to figure out the best way forwards. I need you to make us who we're called to be. And so when Pope Francis talked to Congress 2 weeks ago, I had the honor of being in the chamber and of sitting there direct in the front row of the gallery, directly across from where he was speaking, and it was this glorious thing. If any of you saw it on television, this dark brown panel, all the wood, and then there's Pope Francis in this white, standing out. And the cool thing was, right above him was "In God We Trust," and I thought, isn't that great? And so words of healing and invitation were given there. And I think it's the invitation we need to respond to. He spoke of Abraham Lincoln, who, as president, worked to heal the divisions of our time, who literally fought for unity and freedom. Don't we need, in some ways, to fight in a nonviolent, ever thoughtful way for unity and freedom? He lifted up Dr. King and the whole dream of being certain that everyone can participate in our society. And no one should be left out. This includes, in my view, all the folks who have immigrated here to serve our economy and who we continue to leave out on the side as if they don't matter. I just have to tell you one story from the bus on this. in Kansas City, we met Catherine, a 15-year-old. Her family was from Mexico. She's a dreamer, dreamer kids. They're brought here as really young kids, and they have currently deferral of deportation by executive order. And Catherine's parents, so Catherine's here with a 12-year-old sister, Stephanie, and 4 other kids. Her parents went to pay a traffic ticket in Kansas City and ended up getting deported. Catherine gets left with her 5 siblings and an elderly grandmother. The elderly grandmother was clearly overwhelmed, and when we saw them, Catherine was clearly in charge. That's bad enough. That's heartbreak. That is not the dream that folks were, and both of her parents had been working full-time and participating fully in the economy, working at low-wage jobs, but participating. None of them have a criminal record. None of them would be anyone you'd want to deport, and were very active in their church, St. Anthony of Padua Church in Kansas City. But what happened was, that made it even worse, is Stephanie, now 12, this happened in March, and Stephanie was still 11. In May, Stephanie, the then 11-year-old, attempted suicide because she thought it would be easier for her family if she wasn't there, if there was one less. Who are we as a nation that we cause our kids to think it's better if they're not there? Dr. King's dream includes all of us, where everyone knows they're needed to make a difference, that everyone's voice is needed to build our nation. And then Pope Francis lifted up Dorothy Day. Now, there were some media pundits who said, Doris Day? Does he mean Doris Day? Dorothy Day, I was so excited that in my tradition, Pope Francis lifted up a woman, especially this woman who was such a radical, such a challenging presence, who worked hands-on with folks in poverty, who created the Catholic worker movement, who made her mission to be present to those who are most left out. Isn't that where we need to take our work for the environment, for race, for peace? Don't we need to reach out to reach those who are most left out? And finally, he lifted up Thomas Merton, who in our tradition was an amazing man who was a monk, a contemplative, a man of prayer, but made his peace-building message continues to reverberate through our society. He reached out to Eastern Asian methods or people, especially Buddhism, to cross faith lines, to cross faith traditions, to find the commonality as we all journey to the center, to the divine. And he challenged us to walk without fear towards the other. Well, it seems to me that is the challenge that we're facing. That is the challenge that we're called to, so that we, the people, act without fear. Know that caring for those who are most left out are part of our work to heal the earth and heal our society. To have Dr. King's dream that all are included in our care, and to know that unity and community are worth struggling for. This is the challenge you all face. You thought maybe it was just about changing light bulbs. But what it's really about is recovering our society, that we are community. And while we may do this because of faith, what I think it really is where we meet in our pluralistic society, where we meet in our pluralistic society is the Constitution. That's what we've agreed upon together, so that it's we the people of the United States. It's not we the rich ones. It's not we the really conscious environmentalists. It's not we the ones who got here first. It's not we the citizens. It's not we the rich ones. We the anybody. It's all of us. We the people. So we have a challenge ahead of us. And that challenge can at times feel overwhelming. So to close my little part and then open it up for comments and conversation, I want to close with one of my poems that comes from the Christian scriptures. And because I think it's this whole idea that we can feel overwhelmed. Do you ever feel overwhelmed by all this stuff? I've only just challenged you to change our whole culture. Seems simple enough. I sometimes feel overwhelmed. And one time after our first bus trip, I was really overwhelmed. And what came to me was this story of loaves and fish in the Christian scriptures. And for those of you not familiar with the Christian scriptures, it's Jesus has been out traveling in the desert with the people following him, clamoring, wanting to hear more from him, and the apostles get nervous. They say, send them back to town, they're going to get grumpy. They've been with us all day and they haven't had anything to eat, send them back to town. And Jesus says to them, feed them yourselves. Well, the apostles are like, well, what? Oh, duh. And they say, well, we've got, 5 loaves of day-old bread and a couple of stinky fish. I mean, what's this among so many? And so the story goes, Jesus blesses it, breaks it, sits them down. Jesus, ever the community organizer, sits them down in groups of 50, and people can get to know each other. And probably had a few round tables they could bring out so people could sit around. But then St. Matthew's Gospel says at the end of the account, 5,000 men were fed, to say nothing of the women and children. Well, now I, as a woman, was a little annoyed. So I prayed about this. You can tell I have an odd prayer life, and I wondered, why would it say that? I realized, I think, my theory is, they just counted the ones who thought it was a miracle. The women knew they had brought snacks from home, but the guys were oblivious. So anyway, now that you know the joke of the loaves and fish. I don't know about you, but my family was always like that. The guys would be out having conversation, and we'd be cooking a big meal, and the old girls in the kitchen, and the guys would come in and, oh wow, look, food. Anyway, loaves and fish. I always joked that the miracle of loaves and fish was sharing. The women always knew this. But in this moment of need and notoriety, I ache, tremble, almost weep at folks so hungry, malnourished, faced with spiritual famine of epic proportions. My heart aches with their need. Apostle-like I whine, what are we among so many? The consistent 2,000-year-old ever-new response is this: blessed and broken, you are enough. I savor the blessed, cower at the broken, and pray to be enough. Thank you very much. Thanks, that's sweet. And so it's also probably good to get up and stand up. Let's open it up we've got about a vast 8 minutes for conversation and comment. I'm curious, how does this touch you? What do you think? How do you see this? Are you challenged? Boring? Yes. Good idea. I'll try to repeat too
I guess back in 1948 there was a large study done. It worked out to be 1,500 pages. It was called The American Dilemma. And most people don't even know that it exists, but things have not changed since 1948. Things have not changed since 1948 as far as the American dilemma of what slavery caused to the African American people.
Amen. Amen.
And trying to get past this. And continually I'm with people who come to the discussion and they're standing there looking at a meal. they're in the group, but they're looking at a mirror and they're saying, well, these people, and I think we have to get past that. We have to hold on the mirror and really work at it. We have another dilemma that's beyond the African American dilemma, and that unfortunately is the issue of homophobia. And I think that in dealing with this, I have been put in a situation where basically I have been made to be quiet. But after my fellowship to Princeton and working on blood chemistry, there are a whole group of things, including stressful pregnancy, which seems to cause about 80% of the infants born to be homosexual. There are a lot of things in our environment that are causing this, and we have an environmental situation right here that we're talking about. We're talking about life. I'm talking about people, and we now have other people.
Okay. I got there's tons of folks, but I think your points are really well taken. That any of the othering that we do in our society is creating this divisiveness, so we can't solve our problems. And how do we limit the othering so that it's all about the we, so we can solve problems? And quite frankly, folks that don't want the problem solved are encouraging the othering, and therein lies the challenge. Thank you for lifting that up.
Sister Vincent Schumacher from Trinity Lutheran Church in Grand Rapids. I have two suggestions. One of them relates to the one this gentleman just raised. Are any of you familiar with the series of articles written by Ta-Nehisi Coates in the Atlantic? For heaven's sakes, tell your neighbors, read those articles, read them all. Read his book about his, I can't remember the title of the book, his recommendation, his letters to his son.
Right.
Anybody remember the title of that book? Right offhand? Okay. Ta-Nehisi Coates, C-O-A-T-E-S.
Yes.
He was just interviewed yesterday on Diane Ream's morning show on NPR. Second suggestion I have, Sister, can you finagle an invitation to speak to the Acton Institute in Grand Rapids? I'd love to hear you speak at the Acton Institute.
Cool. I have no idea how to finagle it, but maybe you could, though. And can I, as long as we're doing bibliography, one of the best books I've ever read about the 20th century experience in the African American community is The Warmth of Other Suns, S-U-N-S, which is fabulous. It's U.S. family stories that we should all know, but it really is key. The Warmth of Other Suns, S-U-N-S, by Isabel Wilkerson. I highly recommend it. Yes?
Yes, my dilemma is that getting the community involved, because it's good to reach out to the community, but my problem is how do you get that community to work with you?
Right. That's a huge challenge, and that's why I think Pope Francis's insight that what it requires is a broken heart, so we all feel the urgency. And so I advocate 3 virtues that I left out. The first is holy curiosity. Holy curiosity, where you ask people questions. Now, my mother always told me that you shouldn't talk to people about money, religion, or politics, and I spend my life doing that. So, holy curiosity, when you're in a diner, do they have they done energy efficiency here at the restaurant? Would you be interested? Are you getting paid a living wage to your wait staff? Those kinds of holy curiosity. Then the second is sacred gossip. Sacred gossip is where you share the information. Do you know, we went out to dinner last night to a restaurant right by here. Do you know that they have energy efficient lighting over at the whatever we were at? And so sacred gossip is where you share good news or bad news. Do you know somebody at the diner's not making enough to support her family and it's got a really tough time? Depends on tips. Can we share the sacred gossip of what we find out? And what happens is people get more interested if it's just in conversation. Usually, come work with me. No. Just share the gossip, break their hearts. And then the third thing is the virtue of doing one thing. Too often we progressives who listen to Diane Rehm and NPR and PBS and all this, we just feel overwhelmed by everything pressing in. It's the economy, it's homophobia, it's racism, it's gender discrimination, it's this, that, and the other thing. And what happens is we get paralyzed and don't do anything. So what I'm advocating is the virtue of doing one thing. And that one thing, listen to your inside voice, do it with gusto. Don't insist all your friends do your thing. Do your part and encourage them to do theirs. And that's the way we build the community. Because being in community, then we know that it all gets done. And in the Christian scriptures, we have this idea that we're one body. So everybody does their part. That's the deal. Great, we have a chance for one more.
My name is Mark Clevey, and my question has to do with how we engage youth in this process.
Youth.
How we engage youth in this process, my question. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes. So,
youth is here. Yes.
So I teach a class in entrepreneurship at Madonna University, which is a Catholic university here in Michigan. And we just converted that class to build all the entrepreneurial ventures that the students have are all in line with the encyclical letter.
Fabulous.
So the excitement that has happened, the students are not reading the encyclical, but all of the things that are mentioned in the solar renewable energy and all the toxic materials and stuff, they're designing ventures behind them. I think this is one way, but you must have loads of experience in this. How do you engage youth in what you're telling us? If this was a room full of youth, what would you say to them differently?
Well, there's some youth over there in the corner jumping up and down, eager to answer for themselves.
Excuse me, sir. We are the youth, so
Hey, we're engaged.
we'll tell you about it later when it's our session.
Yeah, they have a workshop on it today.
Well, cool. But the thing is often youth are more engaged than us old folk, and certainly more than the middle. I mean, the fact is the folks between about 30, 35 and 45, 50 are working so hard to survive that they have barely any room to breathe, much less think about these other social issues. And part of it is because we've become so affluent as a nation that they don't have communal supports. And so they think they have to do it all themselves. And my niece's kids have this long list of transportation. I mean, it looks like a motor pool figuring out how to transport them to various classes and this and that and the other thing. And it's so blessedly complicated. Whereas we used to just go outside and play when I was a kid. But that whole individual family stuff is challenging. What we do at Network, and some of you may know Walter Brueggemann. Walter Brueggemann, in his book Prophetic Imagination, he's a scripture scholar. In Prophetic Imagination says that in order to have a community that nurtures a prophetic imagination, the fourth, he has 5 characteristics, invite me back sometime, I'll talk about those, but the fourth one is to have effective discourse across generations, and I add, and cultures. And one of the joys at Network is every year we have an associate program where we have 4 or 5 new grads come and work with us. And they keep us from becoming old fuddy-duddies that say, oh, we tried that back in 1916. Didn't work then, it's not going to work now. And they bring a whole bunch of new energy and commitment and help us from getting too cynical. While we, at the other hand, us older folks can say, maybe if we tweak it this way, we can make it work. So part of it's our openness to listening to their ideas. Part of it is not insisting that the young folk do it our way. Too often we want to pass on our lovely accomplishments to the young people so they can continue it in perpetuity. Oh, get over it, y'all. Let young people create their own ways forward and let us be supportive to them in their leadership. So the leadership's there. We just have to embrace it and trust, if we're people of faith, the gifts are given before we know we need them. And trust those gifts. Trust the young folks to do their job. And I wish I could come to your workshop. I'm eager to hear more. All right, thank you so much for this opportunity.